Time to talk birds, and today a bird that has become an icon to the screen, the pelican. But are you looking at the Australian pelican? Ornithologist Scott McPhee is based in Toowoomba, and he can tell you more about this bird. How are you, Scott?
Oh, pretty good, thanks, Belinda. How are you?
I'm pretty well. Now, today we're talking about pelicans, which you probably don't see a lot in this part of the world.
Look, you'd be surprised where they turn up. But I just want to say, what a funny old bird is the pelican. His beak holds more than his belly can. Did you used to say that poem when you were a kid?
No, I haven't actually heard it. Say it again. Sorry, Scott, too.
What a funny old bird is the pelican. His beak holds more than his belly can. He can take in his beak enough food for a week, but I don't know how the hell he can.
No, I did not. But obviously they tried to do it again, but it didn't quite work. But I was well and truly the generation of Mr. Percival.
Yes, Storm Boy. Yeah,
Storm Boy.
That's a gorgeous film. And it's funny how you talk about that being with a generation, because I showed that to my kids years ago. And my daughter, when she was about 9, we're about 20 minutes into the film, and she turned to her brother and said, "There's no discernible storyline." It's all about the mood and the pelicans. It's a beautiful film.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. I actually don't remember it that well, but I know there was a storyline.
Yes, it's pretty loose in there, but it's just a lovely film. The setting and everything's kind of part of it. But, look, we probably don't really need to introduce pelicans that much. I think everyone knows them, and the Australian pelican has the distinction of having the longest bird beak in the world, and that's around 65 centimetres long. So there's actually 8 species of pelicans in the world, and there's only one found in Australia, and that's the Australian pelican, which we all know. But you also get that in Papua New Guinea, some parts of eastern Indonesia, and out in the Pacific Islands. So they're a beautiful bird. They're not really noted for their call, so why don't we just have a listen to it? Yeah, it's kind of like a deep sound, isn't it? They're not a songbird by any stretch of the imagination, but like with the emus, the advantage of that deep sound is it travels for a very long distance because the sound waves are quite long, so they don't get absorbed by anything in the environment easily. So
right. So there's a purpose to the deep sound.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's effective, I think.
So where do we get them in Australia? What might you see them in this part of the world?
Yeah, well, look, they're nomadic, so they move around the country in response to changing environmental conditions. And actually, right now in Toowoomba, I'd encourage listeners just to keep an eye out, because I've been getting reports from a lot of birder friends of pelicans flying northeast across Toowoomba. And so they're either heading up the Wivenhoe or Somerset Dam or to the Sunshine Coast, but they've been seen in single groups, in groups of about 3 or 4 over the last week or two. So just keep your eyes out. You might see them flying in Toowoomba. We get them at the waterbird habitat occasionally. So they just move around depending on the conditions. And you'll get them all around the country, except for the really dry central and western desert area and the alpine areas.
See, I always thought they were seabirds.
Obviously, that's a good place to see them, but they're fine with marine or freshwater environments.
Right.
So water is the main thing, which is why we're not going to get them in the very dry western deserts. But yeah, anywhere inland you can see them, which is a bit surprising.
And I suppose the thing with water is it's about fishing, and you can get fish in any natural water, I suppose.
Yeah, well, what they eat is actually quite surprising. And of course, the Australian pelican is actually one of the largest pelicans in the world, and it can grow up to just under 2 metres in length, and its wingspan's about 2.5 metres. And so when you see them flying, you might see them flap occasionally, but they like to soar, and it's mainly just to conserve energy. And you might see them in V formations or just in small groups of 3 or 4 or just one, and they'll soar on thermals up to 3,000 metres high. So that's 3 kilometres, which is pretty impressive. But usually when you see them overhead, they're cruising at about 1,000 metres, and they can actually fly non-stop for 24 hours, and they go at about 56 kilometres an hour. And occasionally the Australian pelicans turn up in New Zealand, and they're not they're just vagrants kind of blowing in, basically. There's no permanent colony over there or anything. So with that ability to soar and to go for 24 hours is how they cover such great distances.
So to put that in perspective, they can keep up with your car when you're driving around town, and they're taller than you.
And not only that, they'll do it 1 kilometre above your head. So,
Yeah, that's right.
so they're pretty impressive, aren't they?
You don't realise how big they are because we don't actually get that close to them. That's the truth.
No, they kind of remind me of jumbo jets, actually. The big kind of midsection and the long wings.
I'm sure that's where they got the shape from. Certainly from birds generally. So the pelicans might have been right in there. When do they breed?
Well, look, they'll breed all throughout the year, but it's mainly spring, so August to November. It's a bit like the movement. It depends on the seasonal conditions, and they'll form really big breeding colonies. So they can number right up into the tens of thousands of birds, particularly on offshore islands and in secluded coastal areas. And their nests are just like scrapes on the ground. So sometimes they'll line them with sticks and plants, but they lay 2 to 3 eggs, and both parents will take turns in incubating them, but they'll set the eggs up on their feet, and that just helps maintain more of a stable temperature for the eggs. And they'll do this for about a month until they hatch, and it's just a little bit reminiscent of kookaburras because the first one that hatches is the biggest, and occasionally they'll actually kill the siblings, not always, but, as kookaburras, it's quite regular to kill the third sibling. So occasionally the first pelican out will kill another sibling, but when they're big enough, they form craters. So a lot of water birds do this where a whole lot of chicks will be looked after by a couple of parents. So it's just like humans with a crate, and the craters will be about 100 chicks, and then after a few months when they're ready to fly, off they go and they leave the colony. But we were talking about what they eat just before, and this might surprise people. So you were mentioning how we always like them, associate them with water, and fish is their principal diet for the Australian pelican. But they'll also eat crustaceans and frogs, even small mammals, other baby birds, and they've even been spotted drowning silver gulls, our common seagull, and eating them. So there's a whole other angle to their personality, I think, or their habits that I don't think people really realise. But yeah, as you're saying, it's mainly fish, and they do that by plunging their bill underwater, and they have, as we all know, this large flap of skin, which is called a gular pouch. And with the Australian pelican, it's also, not only does it have the largest beak, it's also got the largest gular pouch, and it can hold 13 litres of water in there. And all pelicans, the lower mandible, each side is flexible, so it opens up a little. So it's almost like a fishing net. You've got this big scoop that goes under, and they'll catch fish in there. And then as they close their beak, they push the gular pouch down on their breast and force the water out, and then they have a fish in there. But they'll also work cooperatively to catch fish. So they'll either herd them towards a shallow area, or you'll get a group of pelicans, and they'll be in a circle, and they kind of close the circle in, and they get all the fish in the middle, and then simultaneously they all put their beaks down to catch the fish. Quite an amazing sight.
What's their conservation?
Least concern, which means they're common, but as I'm always saying, you just can't take anything for granted, and they do have a number of threats. And so the biggest one is development along coastal areas, and that will affect feeding and breeding sites. But also you have the issue of interactions with people, and a lot of penguins find themselves tangled up in discarded fishing line and fishing tackle. So that's something that we have to watch out for and certainly clean up after ourselves if we're fishing. But internationally, they have had some issues, pelicans, and the brown pelican in the United States was one of the most famous, was one of the birds in one of the most famous conservation stories. It, along with bald eagles, ospreys, and peregrine falcons, were badly affected by DDT, which came into the pesticide DDT, which was used after World War II, particularly in California and the southern regions. And what happened was a lot of the hydrocarbons in the DDT would get passed up the food chain, and when it got to these birds, it affected the eggshells. So the eggs were quite brittle, and when the birds were incubating them, they'd break the eggshells, and the chicks would die. And so there was this huge breeding failure for brown pelicans in the USA, and they were listed as endangered by the 1960s. So that only took 15, 20 years from the widespread use of DDT after the war. But when DDT got banned, the population numbers recovered, and so they're doing quite well now. probably by the late 1970s, so they were in a pretty good state. But the brown pelicans, you might remember, you would have seen Finding Nemo.
I certainly have seen Finding Nemo a few times.
Well, look, it's a great film, isn't it? And honestly, I was fine with the talking fish and the talking turtles and everything, but when I got to Sydney Harbour and I saw American brown pelicans and not Australian pelicans, I just couldn't believe it. That was the end of it.
They weren't going to be
American
in the
pelicans.
Sydney Harbour. An Australian pelican
exactly.
was, yes.
Yeah, it was a bit weird, but like you said, we've always got Storm Boy, I guess, for our pelican movies.
You know how you said that we should be watching out for pelicans even around places like Toowoomba? We can watch out for lots of birds too.
Yeah, well, that's right. And so this week, we're right in the middle of the Great Aussie Bird Count. Now, this is an initiative that's run by BirdLife Australia. It finishes this Sunday on the 23rd, and it's the largest citizen science project in Australia. And what it is, it's basically just anyone can go outside for 20 minutes, pick your favourite outdoor spot, and just count the birds that you see in that 20 minutes. You can do that a number of times if you like, a number of times in each day or across different days this week. And then you just upload the list of what you've seen. There's an app you can download or you can just log it online. And so this allows us to get a snapshot. It's held this time every year. And it allows us to get a snapshot of bird populations and what they're doing. And this is important because some of these population changes can be a bit imperceptible and we don't notice them. For instance, kookaburras have been declining in urban areas for at least the last 15 years. And by, I guess, doing it like a stock take each year at the same time, it just gives us a baseline to compare and we can see what birds are going up and what birds are going down. And, you know, when you look at this across generations, the amount of birds that and general wildlife that our parents or our grandparents would have seen is much more in excess of what we're seeing now. But because we're not used to that, we just kind of take as what we've got now as being the normal level, and it's not. And so something like the Great Aussie Bird Count is just a fantastic way that everyone can get involved in creating data for us to analyse. So there are even prizes. It's not about the prizes. It's about getting out and having fun and contributing to our conservation of birds. But if you go to the BirdLife Australia webpage or just Google Aussie Bird Count, you can see what's involved and some of the prizes for participating as well.
So what have you got for us next time, Scott, after we get out and be part of the bird count?
We're going to go from one extreme to the other. I couldn't think of much bigger size difference between a pelican and a fairy wren. But fairy wrens are gorgeous little birds. We all probably know the superb fairy wren. They're quite common. But on the eastern part of the listening area, there's at least 4, maybe 5 species of fairy wren that are common. Changes a little bit further out west in the drier country. But, yeah, we're going to talk about fairy wrens. They're quite different habitat, different size. They exploit a completely different needs to pelicans, and that's something we'll look at as well next time. The 16th of November, so 4 weeks. Can you believe a whole year's almost gone?
No. And yes.
Yeah. I think we started this back in February, wasn't it?
We did.
And we were talking about the channel-bill cuckoos, and I've been seeing lots of photos online of channel-bill cuckoos mating and, starting to lay in other birds' nests and things like that. So keep your eyes out for that too. Probably in another month or two, you're going to be seeing some baby channel-bill cuckoo chicks being fed by some very confused and worn-down crows and magpies and currawongs. So it's going to be quite entertaining, but kind of a bit sad too.
Thank you so much for talking to me this morning, Scott. I look forward to talking to you about fairy wrens next month.
Yeah, no worries, Belinda. Thanks a lot for that. We'll see you then.
That's Scott McPhee talking birds on ABC Southern Queensland, back next month.